All right. Hi, I'm Harshil, and I'm a part of the Youth Culture's Youth Advisory Team. I'm thrilled to be hosting today's session in partnership with Youth Culture and the Learning Disabilities Association of York Region. To kick it off today, we want to acknowledge the land that we are on, which is the region of Peel. I acknowledge that the land that we gather on, which is the region of Peel, operates, is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous people inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe/Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. So we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, we give respect to our first inhabitants. And everyone here, thank you so much for being here with us today. As I mentioned, my name is Harshil, and I'm a grade 12 student. I look forward to a career in computer science, and I'm passionate about digital accessibility. As we move forward, I'd also like to mention that we do have closed captioning services, and you can access that right at the bottom of your Zoom bar. Now, here at Youth Culture, we are committed to inclusive and relevant programming, and today's session with the Learning Partnership of York Region provides us the opportunity to network and learn about the adversities and success of others. So I'm honored to host today's session with our guest speaker, Anthony, who is a 25-year-old Richmond Hill resident who graduated with a BA, which is a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Studies from York University in 2019. Anthony has more recently worked in the office of a member of provincial parliament and gotten involved with his local business improvement area. He's currently undertaking a postgraduate volunteer management certificate, along with earning his peer support certification. So we look forward to hearing Anthony's stories, and we will make sure there's time for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's welcome Anthony.
Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for that introduction, Harshil. I'm very excited to be here with this joint Youth Culture LDAYR opportunity. And I guess I'm just going to share my screen here for a second. Greetings from both myself and the LDAYR. As mentioned previously, my name is Anthony, and as Harshil previously touched upon, I've recently been with the government. I've used to work for a radio station. I've taught English overseas, a bunch of different things. Another important facet about me though, there we go. And I too am learning disabled. I'm gonna get into more details about what this means down the line in terms of my own personal experience. Before doing so, however, I want to talk about what it means to have a learning disability in general and some of the ramifications people with learning disabilities commonly face. So, what are learning disabilities? Broadly speaking, learning disabilities are one or more of the following: input, auditory and visual perception, integration, memory, so this can be both long-term memory and short-term memory, output, so how we express ourselves. This can be both with words or how one has with their actions, their gestures, their posture, things like that, and more, which is basically fine motor skills. So hand-eye coordination, being able to seamlessly transition between activities. Learning disabilities are neurological disorders that affect someone's ability to either interpret what they see or hear or link information to different parts of the brain. Ergo, they basically can affect someone in one or more aspects to how they interpret information, essentially. Learning disabilities as itself is an umbrella term. So as you can see with the actual, umbrella picture right there, there's a whole bunch of different things that it can be categorized under. So common ones include dyslexia, which is difficulties with both written and oral language, dysgraphia, which is difficulties with graphs and charts, and dyscalculia, which is basically the math version of dyslexia. There's also executive functions, so how people retain information, as I've touched upon, and things of that nature. Learning disabilities are not emotional disturbances, sensory impairments, or intellectual disabilities. I also want to point out that as it says, learning disabilities are just that, disabilities, not debilitations. Many people sometimes do not understand that a learning disability is a neurological disorder that can affect just one or more areas of mental processing. It's not something, though, that's universally what someone feels all the time when they're processing information. Because of that, though, what this means is with mild accommodations and the right attitude, anyone with an LD can serve as an example of someone capable of leading a fulfilling, productive life. And they can even be an inspiration to others. Unfortunately, the greatest hurdle a person with a learning disability has to overcome is often the stigma and public perception of being labeled lazy, incompetent, or stupid. Often they begin to hide their disability and struggle in silence. I want to point out, as I'll divulge it with more details, this can also be an internal thing. So it's, right now there's things in place, there's current protections, but people can sometimes feel negative attitudes that, especially upon being diagnosed, and if they never address it, it can sometimes, they don't have to come to terms with it for years. The only way to counteract that then is for people with similar experiences, such as myself, to be open and inviting about their struggles. So let's get started. My specific LD subset is firstly inattentive ADHD, although when I was diagnosed, it was known as ADD, so attention deficit disorder. Here are some of the characteristics. And I also have dyscalculia, which, as I mentioned before, is trouble with math comprehension. So when I was starting school, I should probably point out that, I'm the oldest of 4 children. My parents were relatively young when they had me. And I basically had to go to my grandparents' house during the week before starting school. And I love my grandparents, this was fine. But what this meant was when it came to homework and doing the schoolwork, I was on my own. There was a big language barrier with my grandparents. And if I wasn't going to understand, junior kindergarten English, I don't think Nonna was either. So bless her heart. But it was up to me. Jokes aside, I would say things were okay early on in school. And as I got older and progressed through the grades, though, I did notice that I would get these like spurts of not being able to focus like other students and just feeling like something was off. And I used to be able to chalk it up that, everyone, you're sitting at a desk for 6 hours a day at least, to think that you're going to be fully focused the entire time is futile. It's expected that people are their attention is going to wane from time to time. But me, it felt different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Finally, when I was in the 7th grade going into the 8th grade, I think things were so apparent that the teachers began noticing too. And I was taken somewhere to get tested. And it was right then that I was diagnosed with inattentive ADHD and dyscalculia. I was terrified. High school is right around the corner, and every movie taught me that apparently high school is the most important time of your life, and it dictates the rest of what happens to you afterward, and things better go smoothly. I thought I was going to be just made fun of. I thought I wasn't going to be able to pursue the things I wanted to. And as a side, I know it sounds immature now, but inattentive ADHD is more commonly diagnosed in women than it is in men, or girls than it is in boys. And at the time, that killed me too. Now, at 25 years old, I can tell you that that's completely immature. And just as dyslexia, for example, is diagnosed in more boys, I would never say to, a female student, you're somehow less of a woman because you were diagnosed with this. But when you're 13 years old and, you're thinking of becoming a man, whatever that means, it can kind of sting a little bit. So it was like the additional cherry on top. And I thought I was going to be, for lack of a better word, a freak. I thought I was, and I said, okay, I'm going to completely ignore all supports, and I'm going to prove the system wrong. I'm going to prove the education system that they made a complete mistake. And for 4 years, I harbored this animosity towards the school system whenever the subject came up, and to my parents for that matter. And then I graduated. I'd love to tell you I learned my lesson in 10th grade or 11th grade or even the 12th grade, but the truth was, although I struggled, I still got by. Like, with the exception of math, where I had to pull out everything and I just barely got through, everything else, I got probably lower marks than I could have gotten, but they were still okay marks, and that's it. I graduated. At least on the surface, everything seemed okay. But looking back now, it's especially apparent that, a lot of my friends, even if they didn't quite know what they were doing, they had with themselves after high school, they had some paths. Whereas for me, I felt here, and at least everybody else is here. So yes, I got through, I guess you can say I got success, but in terms of, wellness and self-image and like self-confidence, didn't have any of that. But keep in mind, I'm still blaming the school system at this point. Still though, it was hard not to feel just desperate and pretty bad about myself. And my mom pulled me aside and said, well, there's this place that you can try going to. And I know you don't like to talk about your LD, but maybe you can try this place. And if you don't like it, I won't bring it up again. It's not a big deal. I was so happy because out of my parents, my mom was she was the one who was much more gung-ho on trying to like me seeking out supports and things like that. So I thought this would be a great way to get her off my back in that regard. And I happily went to the place, which spoiler alert, it was the Learning Disabilities Association of York Region. And I met someone there by the name of Stephanie. And within 10 minutes of meeting Stephanie, I said, listen, it's completely fine what you guys do, but with all due respect, I could care less. I'm only here because my mother wanted me to, and just looking forward to whenever this ends. And Stephanie, to her credit, she said, okay, there's the door. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah, like high school's done. Like you're an adult. If you don't want to help yourself, then you're only harming yourself. Like that's okay. You don't have to waste our time, And I was shocked. And at first, I'll be honest, it was pretty much like, reverse psychology thing. Well, no, now that you said I can leave, like I'm going to stay and we're going to get to the crux of it. But a few weeks of constantly going, and it drove the point home that like, oh, I don't have to live like this. Oh, maybe I'll actually look into what these supports are. Maybe I'll actually look into what it's like to being a person and having an LD. In other words, I learned self-acceptance, which, as I'm going to explain later, I think is very crucial to inclusivity. Fast forward about a year, and I was in university. I was getting good grades, and most importantly, like I had self-confidence in myself. I was just happy, and I wrote a message to Stephanie and by extension LDAYR, and I thanked them, and I said, if there's anything you need me to do, I'll be happy to do it. And that was when I was told about basically being a champion ambassador, or with the voices of LDAYR. And basically, it's my job to go to classes or go to meetings or what I'm doing right now and just share my story. And if maybe people in the audience, or someone who maybe has a learning disability or something they're struggling to come to terms with, and they had the same mentality I did, I'm hoping that by maybe sharing my story, I can give them a little bit of at least a different perspective. I know I'll never be able to go back and, that time frame where I was really abrasive with teachers when I didn't need to be. Unfortunately, I can't change that, but maybe I can do something more productive and help change a better future, so to speak. And this is the theme that I was getting to. So as I said, inclusivity starts with self-acceptance, and self-acceptance starts with having the right perspective, including above all else, you have unconditional worth, just by proxy of being a human being first and foremost. If I had to put this another way, I would say upon accepting my learning disability, I carried the mentality that, I'm no better, but no less than anybody else. And I think this mentality is good, not just for self-acceptance, because when you learn to love yourself, it becomes easy to like spread that positivity to others. And you can just learn more things about different people. And I just find it's a much more harmonious existence, both from yourself and your relation to others. One method of having this self-acceptance, for carrying it, is what's known as positive affirmations. So positive affirmations are statements that can help you to challenge and overcome self-sabotaging and negative thoughts. When you repeat them often and believe in them, you can start to make positive changes. A positive affirmation is typically a short yet powerful and simple statement that is created in order to manifest a certain goal. So here's a few examples right here, as you can see. And a few others of my favorites are aim for progress, not perfection. And when you're going through tough times, there's the saying, this too shall pass. If you're looking for more centric ones to people with learning disabilities, there's also these ones that I found. So you have to own your learning disability diagnosis. It affects your daily life in subcapacity, and therefore hiding from it is futile. There's huge value both to your wellness and development to having to become so rigorously self-aware. Success is much more dependent on personality and the ease at which one understands themselves. I really like this one. You have a hurdle in your life and you are overcoming it. You don't need to hide your disability. You need to learn how to get around it. Sometimes this means being honest about your disability and asking for help. Other times it involves learning additional techniques to overcome your limitations. As I was preparing to give this presentation, I came across what's known as the theory of multiple intelligences. So as you can see, rather than how we conventionally tend to think about intelligence as someone who can grasp concepts very easily and is just unilaterally a problem solver, I really like this approach to intelligence because it shows, well, according to this theory, we're all capable of not only learning and excelling, but doing so in different ways and for just different facets of our intelligence. And what this can mean then is intelligence is, in other words, on a spectrum, and people can be a mix of two or more. All human beings have the capacity to develop a human in several intelligences, and we all have unique profiles of intelligence at any given moment due to unique genetic profiles and our ever-changing environments. So there's always a reason to be hopeful, is what I take from that. I wanted to talk a little bit about accommodations, particularly in the context of what we're all going through now. So for those who don't know, accommodations for students with learning disabilities refers to supports, resources, and services over and above what is provided to other students, which enables students with LDs to fully access and utilize the education system. Accommodations provide things like extra time on exams for those who take longer to focus, or an extension on a project deadline, or a student dealing with a depressive episode is an example of if the student is also experiencing mental health issues, concurrent disorders, in other words. Rather than guaranteeing a better grade, accommodations give students a chance to achieve a result that reflects what they really can do with their academic ability. This was honestly one of the hardest things for me to accept, along with my diagnosis, especially when I was in high school. I just, many of us, we come from immigrant families, or we come from families where maybe in previous generations there was a lot more struggle. And I think a lot of us young people are grateful for the opportunities that we have, and we want to make the most of it. And honestly, when I first heard about accommodations, and for a long time, it was very hard not to look at it as if I'm cheating. And like whatever accomplishments I get in school or otherwise, like they're cheapened because I have like these extra help that the other students aren't getting. And how I get around that now is, when it's physical disabilities, we don't use that same barometer. Like, if there's a ramp installed for the school for students who need to use wheelchairs, like we don't look at that as, oh, that student's like, cutting their commute time in the hallways, or they have like a different thing than everybody else. It's completely appropriate, right? So when it's something invisible, like why don't we extend ourselves that same courtesy? In terms of what we mean by being inclusive, I found this when I was preparing the presentation, and I really like this multifaceted definition. So to participate in society through employment and access to services such as education, to connect with family, friends, and the local community in order to prevent isolation, to deal with personal crises such as ill health, and to be heard. In terms of the benefits, like on a societal level for inclusivity, there's a few that I was able to come up with. Especially with these key points, all we have for certain is each other. We can attract more welcoming people, and we can spark creativity and empathy. The first reason, though, I think is better mental health. Now I'm not saying it's unimportant. But besides, the general push to normalize people seeking mental health supports in the workplaces or in school, which I absolutely support, and I think that's a great idea. I'm even talking about mental health in the sense of general stress level. We've all been in situations where we've been in completely new environments, and I think we all can relate to how anxiety inducing that can be, right? Just when you don't know anyone and you're alone. And we've probably had experiences where even just meeting one person, it goes really well, does wonders for our confidence in that environment, and think, oh man, like I'm going to really like it here. And unfortunately, I'm sure we've also had experiences where maybe we find an interaction with someone in a new environment and it did not go so well. And speaking for myself, I think those first impressions can really run deep for an environment, and it can really cause an impact. So to me, that's all the more reason for why we should be striving for diversity and inclusion, because we've all been in that position and we all know how beneficial it can be to be in a place that's much more welcoming. Continuing the benefits in terms of the job market, a much more welcoming job market for all. Now, as we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, when we want to as a society, we can make accommodations. How many students are doing online courses? How many people are working from home? Frankly, there was no reason that we couldn't extend this courtesy to people who can be accommodated better with this in the work market, years ago. But now the proof is in the pudding. So I think we should just continue this once the pandemic ends for the people that need it and can be accommodated with it. Number 3, inclusion promotes tolerance and reduces bullying, whereas exclusion fuels fear of difference. When I was preparing this presentation, I actually did some research to, basically I wanted to see testimonials to people who frankly lived lives that they were maybe promoting, or they held beliefs that were the exact opposite of inclusive. Maybe they thought things of other groups of people that were derogatory, stigmatizing, you name it. And I was basically watching interviews of people who have since, reformed from those views. And what I noticed is they all had these general patterns where, they weren't just upset at the groups, like they kind of led their life with this negativity. It clouded them. And they said once they learned to be more inclusive, both of themselves and others, that went away. They don't look at humanity the same way. And I just think that can be extended to practically every type of group. And it just goes to shows that everybody benefits when we're all more inclusive. That makes sense. Specifically for learning disabilities and things that maybe people may be struggling with, for the 4th reason, inclusion helps us see the person first. So this is something that I've noticed in the past few years, even with learning disabilities, there's been a big push to, instead of saying I'm learning disabled, it would be I'm a student with a learning disability, or in my case, for example, hi, my name is Anthony and I have a learning disability. And at first I didn't understand why the change was happening, but now I completely agree with it. It's basically, no matter what, we're people first. Our conditions don't define us, and we all have our unique stories to tell. And we may be able to relate to others with the same conditions, and that's great. But once again, we all have a unique background. We're humans first and foremost. And number 5, inclusion drives meaningful change, like what we're doing right now with this conversation. Okay, on a final note, and I know this is catered towards students who have learning disabilities, but I think these are great characteristics for any youth, and I'll explain why. There was a 20-year study on successful adults with learning disabilities, and they basically looked for common characteristics. I felt this was important to bring up because one of the things that I used to believe for some reason when I was in my denial phase was I'm going to somehow be able to grow out of my learning disability. And I have news for anybody who has the mentality. Children and students with learning disabilities grow up to be adults with learning disabilities. Now, once again, they're just that, disabilities, not debilitations. And with mild accommodations and differences, there's no reason that they can't accomplish just as much as anybody else. And the adults in the study are proof of that. So the first characteristic that they found with these adults were self-awareness. They were aware of the specifics of their diagnosis. They were aware of their strengths and areas that they struggle with. and they tended to be able to live their life in a way that best accentuated their strengths, especially in terms of career paths. Proactivity, they are able to, while sometimes things can pop up like anyone else in life, they did their best to plan around once they knew what their strengths and deficits were, if that makes sense. They generally tried their best to be engaged with the world around them and just take it one day at a time. Perseverance, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. The only thing that I would add, though, is that I like really reading from the study was it's one thing to persevere, but another characteristic they found with the adults in terms of perseverance was when a certain method was not proving to work, they were not afraid to change it up and just take it as a learning experience. And I thought that was very important to note. Goal setting, that's pretty self-explanatory. And the fifth, the presence and use of effective support systems. And six, effective emotional coping strategies. For 5 and 6, I would say there's nothing wrong with trying different support systems and coping strategies and just finding out what works for you. It's also realizing that those things especially can be fluid as you get older. Maybe 1 year journaling really works for you, and then another year talk therapy also works for you. Or you may really like the services of one organization and then another one the next. Nothing has to be static, and ultimately it's up to you to put your best foot forward, and you can do that by seeking out the most effective supports. Okay, I know that's a lot of information, and I thank everyone for listening, but I guess I can open up the floor now to questions if people have any, or if they're not questions, if people want me to elaborate on anything I've said, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, go ahead. Nicole has her hand up.
Okay. Hi, Anthony. Thank you for that. That was really great. I enjoyed listening to everything that you had to say, and it was really informative. So just to give you a little bit of where I'm coming from. So my son has been diagnosed, he's 9 years old, diagnosed with ADHD and a learning disability. We've known, since before he turned 1 year old that, something was up. And it's been sort of a long and winding journey to get to the point that we're at now. And the journey continues, I have no doubt. But, at this stage, we've just sort of started talking to him about his diagnosis. He's getting supports at school. He has he has to see a laptop, that kind of thing. But what I'm wondering, because listening to you is really making me realize, like, for example, when you said, sometimes you have felt that your accomplishments are cheapened because of the extra support you got. It's, that perspective from somebody who has the lived experience growing up with an LD, that as a parent, no matter how much empathy and support, and no matter how much I'm there for him, I don't have that same perspective. And so what I'm curious to know is if you have anything that you would like to, if you could share advice or just perspective on, although I'm willing to do everything, what's the most effective way that I can support him, or what can I say to him? Because right now he's feeling like he's not smart, even though cognitively his tests tell us that he is, Yeah. And just trying to bridge that gap, because no matter how much I tell him, he still doesn't believe it. So anything that you can sort of add, I'd love to hear it.
Well, the first thing I would say is I really appreciate your honesty. And if I had to give advice, to you as a parent, and I don't mean to come across as if I'm verging, I just, in terms of when he's older, just from my own experience, I'm not going to lie, it might sometimes be hard to avoid this. Like he might, still, especially I'm trying to think when he gets older in terms of the years of high school. And even if he's come to terms with his learning disability, I'm sure sometimes those feelings will crop up. What I found helps with that, and when he reaches that stage, I know it's many years from now, is especially I would say from when high school ends, because everyone is going their own different paths, and even in university or college, there's a lot more people are with their own schedules and working. It becomes very hard to hold yourself up to the same standard when everybody is literally living different lifestyles. And then I find it really clicks that, okay, so if I study for a test and I like to split it up each day a little bit, the week before, or somebody likes to study a lot 2 days, does it really matter? Like, as long as everyone finds what works for them. What I would say to him now, I'd maybe stress in these younger years, is there's beauty in the imperfections, for lack of a better word. Like, we all struggle with different things. I know that sounds really corny. In terms of a visual example, maybe you can bring up, again, when it's something physical, we don't tend to judge as harshly. Like, I used to have when I was his age in elementary school, there was a friend of mine who, he was physically disabled. He had a cane, like, to walk. And he, for exercise, when we would run around the gym, obviously he would, run differently than others in the class, right? And nobody ever said, like, well, is he cheating, because he, the way he runs laps is different? Of course not, right? But that's because it's visible that we don't. So you can show back that, you may not feel that you're smart sometimes, like, just because maybe the class is structured, but we have the tests, we have the diagnosis. Like, it's not a matter of him being unintelligent. Maybe he needs to see that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I see Helga has your hand up. We can answer your question.
I'm muted. Thank you so much, Harshil. I just wanted to quickly add to what Anthony was saying there, Nicole, that, one of the things that we'd like to emphasize in regards to when we talk to the kids, it's the acceptance piece is huge. Talk to your son often, help him kind of come to understand his diagnosis. What we see often at the learning disabilities is there's a bit of anger in the children who are kind of confused as why this is happening. So as parents, the more we talk to them, the more we explain to them what's happening. As Anthony was saying, and the difference is really, just because our disability is not physical doesn't mean we don't need support, and it doesn't make us less smart. It's gonna pass. And I think that's, for me, the message that Anthony offers. And I love his story about, I was angry and then I came to be aware that I didn't have to be angry this time for so long, but he had to come to terms with that. And, look how good he's turned out. So I guess for whatever hope I can offer you here, we love having our champions out, because this is what you can look forward to in the future, sometimes on the darker days. So thanks, Anthony, as always.
No problem. And I think,
I have a question. I just wanted to add.
I'm happy to answer more questions, but I think that reminds me of one more thing I want to add. Speaking of the darker days, if you will, while there might be some inevitability, Nicole, I also wanted to bring up that I think the school system in the last 10 years, or at least from when I was in high school, I think they've realized that maybe not explaining to the general student population what learning disabilities are, coupled with some of the techniques for supporting learning disability students, such as bringing them to a different classroom, is maybe not a good combination. So I think there's a lot more awareness for general students about that students with LDs are just as capable. And I think that's going to make the classrooms a much better place to be in for students with learning disabilities and not with learning disabilities alike. So I think that's a good thing to know too.
Awesome. All right. I see Jillian also would like to ask a question. Go ahead.
Hi. Anthony, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Kind of going off what you just said, my question was more on the lines of when you were, as you said, in high school and you kind of wanted to do it yourself, and you, I believe you said you were avoiding the supports there. What would you say is something that we can do to kind of bridge that gap to make the supports more, not only accessible, but make people want to use them, to make it less of a taboo thing to use supports?
So I would say the first thing that I would note is, in a lot of ways, keep it up. Something that makes me very happy when I present to schools nowadays is to the point where I've kind of had to change my presentations a bit, speaking to high school students, to be completely honest with you, is when I was in high school, using a laptop was not allowed. The only way it was allowed was if you were diagnosed with a learning disability. And while those students, obviously, even the ones that benefited from support, it kind of put a bullseye, against you as a student, right? You stood out. And if people didn't know that, sometimes students, I think, would maybe get jealous, or they would think like, why does this student get preferential treatment if they didn't know? Nowadays, though, from what I understand, bringing laptops in the school is much more common, and they've become the norm due to COVID, but that's, kind of besides the point. So I think that's great because it essentially it normalizes things, right? It's the same thing now with it's very common to putting our pronouns for names, right? Because if we all do this, it normalizes it and it makes it more accepting for everyone to do it. So that's definitely something. In terms of what can be done to further bridge the gap, I'm sure this is already being done, but maybe if there's an online forum or anything like that, I think sometimes when I had to essentially go away from the classroom and go into the resource room, it was very overwhelming at first. Now, part of that's because I didn't want to be there all, but even I can imagine in an alternative universe where I embraced my LD in high school, I imagine like just even so, like that can be an intimidating experience. So maybe just a digital avenue where people can ask questions and just feel more comfortable before they make that first big step, I think can go a long way, but just a suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Those are great things to think about.
Okay, we have more hands up next. We'll go to Jeremy.
Hi, Anthony. This is Jeremy. Thank you, first of all, for your presentation. It was actually very, very interesting to hear and just see, like, hear about your experience growing up with LD. I just have one quick question, like, from, I guess it's just from my curiosity, is what piece of advice would you give to, let's say, a child who has been diagnosed with an LD and ADHD compared to the reason why I asked specifically a child is because I'm just under the assumption that for adults who have ADHD, and then they may have already been able to sort of process and understand that is part of who they are. But like, let's say if a child who doesn't know how to process that or may see themselves as less intelligent in some way, what kind of advice or what kind of support would one give to a child specifically?
I know that this obviously depends on their age, but if I had to give like an allegory that I think can be useful to a child, maybe coming to terms with their learning disability, is upon breaking the news to them and inviting, we can go through the resources, you can learn a little bit more about like what this entails. What I tend to compare to with younger students is it's like learning how to take off the training wheels on a bicycle. You don't have to learn it in one day. It's okay to take breaks. And especially if they're older and most of them have completed that process, you can talk about, do you remember the first time you were on the bicycle and maybe it felt scary? Maybe it felt very hard at first. Then it got a little bit easier, then a little bit easier. And then finally, like it became like part of your life. You didn't even think of it when you went on that bicycle without the training wheels. And I would maybe draw a comparison with that this might feel scary at first, it might be hard, and it's completely okay to talk about those things. But what is important is just taking it slowly and just making sure you understand, because it's going to be better for you if you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. The reason why I just wanted to know is because I think it's one of those, I feel like sometimes, like, because maybe they're still developing and growing, and it may be really difficult to understand. But I like the fact that you talked about take it step by step and in a slow process, and kind of going back to like, oh, remember the time when you first started, and just being able to give that sort of reassurance and of the accomplishments that they've made is definitely a good one.
Yeah, making it relatable to them.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
All right, that was some great advice, Anthony. I see Nicole's hand is up again. Go ahead if you have a question.
Hi, Anthony.
Hello.
So first of all, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed listening to your story. And I really appreciate how you're being really vulnerable with us. I think it's really helpful and good to talk about that kind of stuff. So I really like the example that you use that's a helpful tool is saying affirmations. And kind of going off what Jeremy was asking, I'm kind of wondering, like, when you were in grade 10, you mentioned it was really hard for you to accept this diagnosis that you had.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's something maybe that someone could have said to you or that you heard from someone that would have been really helpful and would have been really comforting maybe and would have helped you accept your diagnosis more. Or even if something that could have helped you accept your diagnosis.
Sure. I would, if I can go back to myself, I guess, in a way, and say something to my younger self, I would say your success will be cheapened if you don't take care of your wellness. If I had to summarize it in one sentence, because I think that was the hardest thing for me to learn is, by all accounts, I graduated high school a successful student, but I wasn't happy. And there was no reason for me to be. And it's funny now when I think about it too, because sometimes I'll speak with students who have learning disabilities and they will bring up incidents where maybe someone unintentionally has said something hurtful about their capabilities because they're more out than I was. And while I sympathize, and I think I can definitely relate to that, to tell you the truth, I didn't experience it myself really, because I kept it hidden, right? Like I didn't, even among close friends, like I didn't tell them until years later when I was in university, but I still carried that internal weight when I didn't have to. So I feel like a lot of times, basically to get back to your question, a lot of times when young people who are like myself, they're hostile to coming to terms with it, the paradigm that they'll do is, no, I'm going to be successful and it's going to be authentic. And what I would do is try to change that on them and say, but are you going to be happy? Are you going to be satisfied with yourself? And have you even given this a chance? Because I guarantee you most of them haven't, just being honest with you from personal experience. So I just find that opens up that window. Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really great. And then we have Megan.
Hi, how are you? Good. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate your presentation and everything that you had to say. This is more just comments and no questions. You can breathe easy for a bit. But I really appreciate your point of view. My brother is 29, and when he was younger, he was diagnosed with ADHD. And later on, that diagnosis kind of turned into autism. He's on the autism spectrum. Basically, he's high functioning Asperger's. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really important that we have people like you who are willing to share and be vulnerable, because I know that when he was younger, if he had somebody like you to look up to and to listen to, his experience would have been really different. So I think what you're doing is really positive, and it's really shedding a really positive light on, something that could be seen as, you even said it yourself, you were in denial, basically. Yeah. So, it can be seen as such a negative thing, and it's really not, and it's just, you're just learning a different way. You just live your life a different way, and everything is the same. So I just really wanted to commend you on what you're doing, and really appreciate your point of view. It's really good to hear somebody else, because I know obviously somebody close to me, I know their experience, and I know it wasn't great. So hearing different points of view is really great. So just keep up the good work.
Megan, I appreciate that so much. It's
yes.
a big reason why I do stuff like this. And yeah, again, I've said it before, I can't go back in time, but maybe I can help transform it for someone. And I'm not, I've also spoke with people who were diagnosed with learning disabilities in adults, when they were adults, even young adults. And I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm not saying that they had no difficulty coming to terms with it. but I think it's felt a little bit differently. I think, to be honest with you, a lot of them are, oh, this explains why I was like this in a lot of regards. And there is this thing of they finally get closure. Whereas I think for young people, it just, oh my God, it just feels like a battering ram. Like, oh, I want to be like my peers, and that was taken away from me, and I'm bitter. And I understand that feeling. Believe me, I do. But again, it's only just, a lot of that rage, it's just honestly turned inward. Most of it's turned inward, and then what the little bit that gets out, like a lot of it just becomes a protection mechanism, and it's not the way to go.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a great thing, so keep it up.
Okay, I see Jeremy has his hand up again.
Hi, Anthony. Sorry again. I just have another quick question. I wanted to sort of just ask, I know when it comes to, like, I'm not a parent myself, but I'm just kind of wondering, for parents or even professionals who have, when it comes to the non-academic part of it, like the piece of like supporting those who have LD or ADHD, I wanted to know what are some of the things that sort of has helped you in terms of the things they say to you or the comments. I guess just like the more conversational pieces that sort of really, in a way, I'm guessing it might be very different for everyone. But I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the things that are said that could sort of, in a way, trigger that motivation or trigger the boost of that esteem for one person who may have an LD or ADHD. I don't believe that there's sort of like a fixed answer, but I'm just kind of wondering what sort of has worked for you, and or one of some of the things that you would suggest, for those who are out there who don't have LDs can support those who do.
Sure. Yeah, this would be hard to answer because there's no fixed answer, but I can give you based on my personal experiences, like if I had to capsulize them, in terms of what you can say to someone if you want to show support, is because you learn differently, you probably develop strengths that others can develop, but it's not as important in their life. And therefore, like, maybe you could be more motivated. Like, I'll give you an example. Personally, I think I'm very organized with calendars and lists, much more than the average person, because I don't really have a choice. I need to structure my life accordingly. And I've done so from a young age, because otherwise I find things spin around. It's very hard to juggle commitments. Whereas I've noticed, like, my other friends, and it's ironically ones who say, like, Anthony, I don't know how you're so organized. They just, without writing it down, oh yeah, I have my appointment next week, and then this is occurring on Wednesday. Like, they know. And sometimes, like, I would get jealous of that, and yeah, sometimes I do. But like, I'm very thankful that I've developed like an acumen for organizing myself. So I guess that's probably one way you can say is you likely have strengths you didn't even know you had, if I had to say it in one sentence, where you can support the people. And I think another thing too is it's just a different way of, I notice I extrapolate things differently. Like, if I want to learn something, I'll think about seemingly unrelated concepts and connect it. Like, for example, when I wanted to work on my public speaking skills, I thought about, why are people so afraid of public speaking? And I thought the first thing was, I think a lot of times, especially when we go up on a stage or something, we're afraid of looking foolish. Like, we're afraid of making a mistake. And then it hit me that, why don't I just go up on a stage and make a mistake? It'll be a way to get over it. So I joined a debate club in university. And sure enough, like, eventually, like, I would just, come up with something. I would come up with something delayed to say, or I would, in my mind, like, oh, I look foolish. And it was like, oh, the world kept turning. I can come back next week. It's not as bad. So, like, I found, like, that's just one way you can explore different venues, I guess, is a way you can put it, to showing someone support.
That's actually pretty inspirational. The fact that you even said, like, yeah, public speaking, I know it can be a very daunting, or very scary thing to do. But the fact that you able to sort of like process like, wow, the world's not going to stop just because I made a mistake. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the very admirable things that you are able to sort of overcome that, and really, really inspired by that kind of courage. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
All right. So I don't see anyone else's hand up, but I see the comment from Julie, and I would have to say that I really agree with that. Especially that ending bit with Anthony's story, just giving everyone hope. And I don't have any learning disabilities myself, but I can say that everything you shared, or at least a good chunk of it, I can relate to and learn something from it. For instance, there's that aim for progress, not perfection, right? And I see myself doing that with self-awareness. I think that's a huge point. So I think personally, I've learned a lot from this, even though I don't have the same, story experiences as some of the people present here. And so I think I'll ask you for any final words if you have, Anthony.
I really appreciate the kind words, Harshil, first of all. And I also think too, this is a mutual learning experience. I think sometimes people like myself, we would look at students who didn't have learning disabilities and just, assume, oh, they don't know what it's like to struggle with this. And even if, that's technically true, like when I look back on that now, like that's kind of a foolish statement in itself, right? Because we all have struggles. If it's not intellectual, it's other stuff like that. I think everyone has dealt with something that was hard to come to terms with in their life, or they dealt with a situation unexpectedly. So I think that's why my story or similar stories like it, I think, resonate with people, because it taps into something that we've all experienced as human beings. And I'm so happy that everyone who attended tonight was able to come. And I really hope that there was aspects of my story that people enjoyed. It sounds like it was, based on the questions and the comments, which I really appreciate. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you both to Kim and Helga. So every time I get to do something like this, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. We're really glad. I'm sure everyone's, I'd say, impressed, happy with this entire event. And so as a wrap up, we thank you, Anthony, for sharing your story with us today. And we look forward to seeing you again. And thanks to the Learning Disabilities Association of York Region for partnering with us on this event. You can check out more opportunities from Youth Culture on our Instagram, which was in the chat earlier, but it's at Youth Culture Inc. And feel free to reach out to us anytime. So thank you to everyone who joined us today, and we'll see you all next time.